Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Alyeska Pipeline Service Company, Alaska's pipeline to the future, delivering oil today, sustaining operations for tomorrow, committed to safety, operating the 800-mile Trans-Alaska Pipeline since 1977.
Cook Inlet Tug and Barge is a marine transportation company specializing in harbor services with a primary marketing focus on the Port of Anchorage, providing their customers with quality-based service specifically tailored to their needs.
The National Weather Service.
Good evening and welcome to Alaska Weather. I'm Sam Albanese from the National Weather Service. Today's weather around the state, well, we saw a continuation of the dry, sunny weather over much of the southern mainland portion of the state on up into the interior. We do still have our storm system out in the Bering Sea and the Aleutians with a weaker storm that was impacting southeast Alaska. And we'll get started by taking a look at our satellite imagery over the North Pacific. And as you can see, here's the system that's been affecting the Aleutian Islands and the Bering Sea. The main low pressure center is back here, and as I run the loop one more time, you can kind of see here's your frontal boundary, the jet streams down here, but then another low pressure system that was developing and moving over towards the Unalaska area, and that's been keeping conditions somewhat cloudy, somewhat a little bit windy, as well as some precipitation throughout the Aleutian Islands, as well as into the eastern Bering Sea. Taking a look at the state of Alaska, the image over the state of Alaska, our GOES satellite imagery, you can kind of see southeast Alaska. Here's our system down here. Some moisture was pushing on up into southeast Alaska. It did produce some rain down in the southern panhandle throughout the day today. And as you can see, clouds spread as far north as Juneau. Taking a look again at the western part of the state, here's our low pressure system and the front or what's left of our front in the trough that's impacting the Bering Sea coast over towards Kodiak Island. And also notable is up into the Arctic regions of the state, basically the northwest Arctic coast, over towards Barrow and even a little bit east of that. We did have these clouds that were rolling in or stayed in that area, and that was resulting in some flurries with fog there, as you can see on the map for today. Down in southeast Alaska, here's our low pressure system that I was talking about with the satellite imagery, rain in the southern half of the panhandle. In the Alaska Peninsula region, southwest portion of the state, some rain was occurring across Kodiak Island. At times there was some snow mixed in, more at the higher elevations there. Rain across the Alaska Peninsula, a mixture of rain and snow across towards the Pribilof Islands, although not very much accumulations or amounts of precipitation with that. And then our front extends all the way on back to our low pressure system out towards Shemya with generally rain showers over the central to western Aleutians with a mixture of rain and snow to the extreme western Aleutians. By tonight, we're going to see the cold air coming in, wrapping around into the backside of this low pressure system as the low is consolidating. You can see the main center is becoming that frontal low. Rain and snow showers over the western Aleutians, rain over the central to eastern Aleutian Islands that's still in the warm air, although by morning you might see a mixture of snow in some of those areas. Over towards the Alaska Peninsula, generally expect rain there. A mixture of rain and snow across Kodiak Island, as well as along the Kilbuck Mountains, the northern portions of that Bristol Bay area. Pretty much most of Bristol Bay, because of the cross barrier flow, shouldn't see much in the way of precipitation. If they do see anything, it'd be some light mixed rain and snow. Southeast Alaska, with our low pressure system kind of dissipating there. Rain in the southern panhandle. Further to the north, going to see temperatures cooling down, and you'll see a mix of snow into the rain that we expect at least up towards that Juneau area. There's a chance you might see some rain and snow or snow up into the Haines-Skagway area. Clear cold conditions over the mainland are going to persist, and up along the Arctic coast, some low clouds, flurries, and fog can be expected there. Taking a look at the forecast for Thursday, and we'll turn our attention to our low pressure system that's affecting the Bering Sea, as this is the big system. And you can see that we have a frontal low, the main low, the front extending down into the western Alaska Peninsula, pushing moisture on up into Kodiak Island. Expect rain across Kodiak Island, the Alaska Peninsula. Mixture of rain and snow as we move over to the Pribilof Islands. Rain and snow showers across much of the Aleutian Islands, and back to rain showers over the eastern Aleutian Islands. Not much along the Bering Sea coast, just some cloudier conditions. Outside chance you may see a period of light rain or mixed rain and snow there. South central Alaska, much of the mainland, sunny conditions for tomorrow. Southeast Alaska, cloudy conditions. The low is kind of moving off into British Columbia. There still should be a little bit of rain falling down in the extreme southern panhandle there. Arctic coast, generally cloudy conditions tomorrow. May see some foggy conditions or flurries, but generally not a lot of change up along the Arctic coast. By Friday, expect conditions as our low pressure system moves over towards the Alaska Peninsula, the front swinging into the Gulf of Alaska. This should result in the beginning of a change in our weather pattern over the southern mainland. We've been enjoying a relatively long period of dry, rather quiet conditions. That's all going to change by this weekend. Expect rain across Kodiak Island, a mixture of rain and snow showers or rain and snow in that Bristol Bay area. Looks like up into the Yukon and Kuskokwim Delta, they're just going to see cloudy conditions. Cloudy conditions prevalent across much of the western half of the state. Weak low pressure up along the Arctic coast. May see some flurries and fog associated with that over the Barrow and west. Southeast Alaska, generally speaking, cloudy conditions, some showery conditions. As the front moves on in by Friday, you're going to see your winds increasing in those outer coastal areas. Temperatures around the state today, 30s and 40s in southeast Alaska, generally in the 40s over the south central region, 30s as we move on inland to 20s as we get closer to the Brooks Range, moving on up to the Arctic coast. Single digit readings, there was even some areas that actually stayed below zero. Basically Brooks Range and north, single digit readings over into the Kotzebue Sound area, 20s and 30s as we get down to the Norton Sound region, and southwestern Alaska, 30s to low 40s, 40s along the Alaska Peninsula, 30s in the Pribilof Islands, and 30s along the length of the Aleutian Islands, generally mid to upper 30s there. Taking a look at lows for tonight. Cool conditions across the Arctic coast, sub-zero readings, 15 below in Barrow, minus teens over much of the eastern Arctic coast. Dropping down below zero in the eastern interior for some areas, but generally staying in the single digits above or below zero there. South central Alaska in the clear, cold skies, expect temperatures to drop down into the teens to low 20s. Southeast Alaska into the low to mid 30s. Southwestern Alaska, teens and 20s, 30s across the Alaska Peninsula as well as the Pribilof Islands and along the Aleutian Islands. For tomorrow, expect temperatures in the Panhandle to be into the 40s throughout much of the Panhandle, 40s along the North Gulf Coast, South Central Alaska, 30s to low 40s in the eastern interior, as well as 30s predominantly over much of southwestern Alaska. You may see a few readings get into the low 40s there. Up towards the Seward Peninsula and the Norton Sound side in the 30s, teens on the north side and the Kotzebue Sound side. Single digits right around zero for much of the Arctic coast. 40-degree readings are expected across the Alaska Peninsula as well as the Aleutian Islands, with 35 in the Pribilof Islands and the extreme western Aleutians out at Shemya. For tomorrow's flying weather, generally VFR over the majority of the state, over the mainland. Some marginal conditions in southeast Alaska with that exiting low pressure system. Marginal to IFR conditions up along the Arctic coast with the flurries and fog there. And marginal to IFR conditions across Kodiak Island, marginal conditions across the Aleutian Islands and the Alaska Peninsula, with some IFR conditions in the Pribilof Islands. For our passes, Anaktuvik Pass, VFR conditions for tomorrow as well as Adigan Pass. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, expect VFR conditions as well. VFR to Rainy Pass, Windy Pass, Isabel Pass, and Tahneta Pass, all expected to be VFR. Even Portage Pass, VFR conditions. The only place we're expecting marginal conditions is Chilkoot and White Pass, and probably that'll be VFR by the afternoon. Taking a look at our freezing levels, expect your freezing levels basically at your surface across the northern half of the Bering Sea as we move on over towards the mainland. And of course, you're going to see daytime temperatures get above freezing, just a little bit above freezing, but the majority of the state should see freezing levels staying below zero, especially north of the Brooks Range. Southeast Alaska, generally expect your freezing levels you're going to have warm air overriding that later in the day. 2,000 feet across Kodiak Island into the Bristol Bay area and the Alaska Peninsula. Taking a look at our forecast for icing tomorrow. Expect some isolated moderate rime icing down in the southern panhandle from your freezing level to 6,000 feet, and also expect some moderate mixed icing from your freezing level to 10,000 feet from Kodiak Island across the Alaska Peninsula to the eastern and central Aleutians, as well as into the Pribilof Islands. Taking a look now at our jet stream, basically we have one component of the jet coming off the Russian Far East along the Brooks Range at about 60 to 65 knots. Then we see another portion of the jet that is coming just off the southern point of the Kamchatka Peninsula, accelerating to about 95 knots well south of the state. This really isn't going to have an impact on us. In fact, this is why most of our weather has not been happening. It's supporting this low in the Bering Sea and the Aleutian Islands, 125 knots well south of the Gulf, and then it tapers off to 60 knots as it makes landfall over towards the Queen Charlotte Islands. Moving on down to the 9,000 foot level, generally speaking, light winds across the Arctic coast, light winds along the south central region. Southeast Alaska, 25 knots or so is what we're kind of anticipating there. 20-knot winds coming across Kodiak Island and the Alaska Peninsula, dropping off to about 10 to 15 knots as we move on up towards the Seward Peninsula. And right around our low pressure system in the Bering Sea, basically 20-knot winds in advance of it, 30 to 35-knot winds around the backside of that low, and that cold advection northerly flow portion of the low pressure system. Taking a look now down to the 3,000 foot level. Light winds across southeast Alaska, 10 to 15 knots is all we're expecting there. 10 to 15 knots across much of the eastern mainland right on up to the Brooks Range until we get up towards the Arctic coast where we're looking at about 20-knot winds there. 10-knot winds out of Norton Sound, and then as we see the influences of this low pressure system with the associated front, 20 to 25-knot winds across Kodiak Island to the Alaska Peninsula, 20 to 30-knot winds over the eastern Bering Sea, and wrapping around the north and west side of this low pressure system, 35-knot winds, 30 to 35-knot winds in that cold advection part of that system. Taking a look now at our turbulence for tomorrow, and you can expect basically some isolated moderate turbulence across Kodiak Island below about 3,000 feet ground level, and then also out over the central to western Aleutian Islands in that northerly flow, isolated moderate turbulence below 3,000 feet. That wraps up this portion of the show. Enjoy the segment. Come back for the marine forecast.
Hello everyone and welcome to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm Jim Peranto. Nestled in the town of Palmer is the highly sophisticated West Coast and Alaska Tsunami Warning Center, which is responsible for providing reliable tsunami detection, forecasts and warnings, and to promote community resiliency. The center is responsible for monitoring all of the North American coast, including Canada, Puerto Rico, and the Virgin Islands, with the exception of Mexico. Today I'll be speaking with Cindy Preller, a geologist at the center, and she'll give us some insight on the products they issue and what they mean. Welcome to the studio, Cindy.
Thank you, James.
So what types of data does the center record to determine the tsunami threat?
We receive over 300 seismic gauges and tidal gauges that are scattered all over the globe real time. And we also maintain our own Alaska network of both seismic and tide. Okay.
What type of products do you issue at the center?
We issue 4 products. We issue a warning, we also issue an advisory and a watch, and then a tsunami information statement.
Okay, so you have 4 different pieces there.
Yes.
What do the messages mean? So you have the warning, you have the watch. What do those mean?
Well, the warning is when we know a tsunami's been generated and we're expecting over a meter of water to touch our coastline in our area of responsibility. So we'll issue a warning for that area, which means to evacuate. And then the advisory, which is actually our second level product, means that there is a tsunami, but we're not expecting people to evacuate.
Okay, and that's changed, right? That
It
definition,
has.
just recently.
Yes.
So again, explain the tsunami advisory in detail. What that means.
Sure. So one of the things we do with our ocean modeling, which is based on bathymetry and the speed of the wave, is we forecast a wave height on every these benchmarks along the coastline, and if we're expecting over a meter at any one of those, we will issue a warning.
Okay.
Which is to evacuate. And if we are expecting anything between 30 centimeters and a meter, then we'll issue an advisory. Because we've found that most damaging tsunamis, really damaging tsunamis, are over a meter in height, but there can be extensive harbor damage and beachfront damage for even 30 centimeters of water.
Okay, and then back to the watch. So what does that mean?
A watch just means that there is a tsunami in the basin.
Okay.
So for example, if there was an earthquake in Fiji that generated a tsunami, we aren't expecting it to touch our AOR, but there is a tsunami in the Pacific. So we might issue a watch, and it just means heads up. You know, there's something going on. If it's big enough, it still may affect us. So it just means we're monitoring.
Okay, and it could change into a warning.
Sure, or an advisory.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then you also mentioned an information statement. So what is that?
Yeah, and we issue more information statements than anything else, and it's kind of our PTSD message. It's meant for people that have survived tsunamis. And if they're on the coast and they feel an earthquake, because we teach if you are on the coast and you feel an earthquake, it may generate a tsunami before we can warn. So if you're on the coast and you feel an earthquake, but it's too small to generate a tsunami, we'll issue an information statement saying, relax, this is too small, no worries.
Okay. What are the appropriate actions people should be taking when they see these messages come out, whether it's a warning, an advisory, information statement?
People should always do what their local emergency managers instruct them to do first and foremost. So regardless of what we recommend, if their local fire chief is saying evacuate, then they should evacuate. We recommend evacuation for the warning, anything above a meter. And for the advisory, it's really, I think, supposed to be very helpful for emergency managers, because it just means clear the beach and clear the harbor. But you don't have to clear your town, you don't have to worry about moving, you know, hospitals and that kind of stuff. It's just get off the beach.
I remember when I worked in Kodiak, and we have a balloon launch site that's near the coast. I remember seeing information there. It's like, if you feel the earthquake, and if it's enough to knock you down, don't worry for the warning statement to come out, or you know, just get to higher ground.
Get to higher ground. You know, even something like a landslide can generate a tsunami, and there's no way we can warn you for that. So, you know, you just need to be smart. But the other thing about a tsunami that's different than a weather wave or a wind wave is that it's, you know, it has the full energy of the earthquake behind it. So the entire water column is moving. That's 5 miles deep of water in some places, right? That's pretty tremendous.
Yeah.
So it can create some just wild currents and some very squirrely behavior near the coastline. And the other thing is if there is a warning, it may last for days and days and days. So when people evacuate, they should expect to be evacuated for a long time.
And that goes along with the Asian tsunami, and everybody got to see firsthand, you know, just how powerful these things can be.
Yeah, terrifying.
And you mentioned before, off air, you know, that particular tsunami was recorded all over the world.
Every tide gauge on the planet recorded it, and the tsunami itself lasted for longer than 30 hours. Because a tsunami isn't a single wave, it's a chain of waves that can continue for days.
How often are tsunami warnings issued?
You know, not that often. We've had, there's probably a handful every decade. There have been 13 since 1980 that have been issued. And of those 13, 8 of them were tsunamis.
Okay.
But you know, in 2007, I think it was 2007, there were 17 tsunamis recorded. So in 1 year there were 17 tsunamis, but most of them are small and they're well behaved and they give us data and they don't hurt anybody. So a tsunami does not necessarily mean it'll be another Sumatra or another 64 like we had here.
Right.
I mean, it can actually be pretty small.
And your area of responsibility is quite big. I mean, here you are in the small town of Palmer.
Yeah.
And you are really looking at a wide range of coastline, including the Caribbean.
Yes.
So
yes.
Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's incredible. It's like we have our thumb on the pulse of the planet, and basically it's the whole planet, because we are also Hawaii's backup, and they're responsible for the international ocean. But our primary responsibility is to the U.S., North American, and Canadian coastlines, as well as Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, including the British Virgin Islands. So it's crazy because there's different cultures all over the country. There are different hazards all over the country, and trying to spread tsunami awareness is a huge task for our little staff in Palmer.
Yeah. And you have a website.
We do.
You want to touch a little bit about the information that you have on the webpage that might be beneficial for people out there?
Sure. And the thing that people should remember is tsunami.gov, because the website's address is long and you won't remember it. So tsunami.gov is great. And that'll take you to both our website and Hawaii's, as well as some other outreach, international outreach sites. But once you get to our website, it'll tell you, first off, if there's a warning. It'll have maps that show you where, and there's phone numbers and links to emergency managers. But also, if there's been a tsunami, we'll have all the data up, as well as the tide gauge records that'll graphically show the tsunami. And so a couple days ago, there was an earthquake in the Caribbean, right, 7.2. And we're still analyzing that to see if there's a tsunami, but the data will be up on the web as soon as we know.
And there's something else on the web, I remember. It's something, if you feel the earthquake,
Yeah.
people can actually go to the website and say, gosh, I felt that, and give sort of a detailed description of that, and that goes to you guys at the
It
center?
goes to us, but ultimately it goes to the USGS and the National Earthquake Information Center in Golden. They generate what's called shake maps out of those reports, and so they are very useful, and they're fun to read. They are. They are.
Well, thank you for coming in today, Cindy.
James,
I really
thank you.
appreciate it. It's been wonderful talking to you. We'll get you back in the studio again sometime
Anytime.
soon. And thank you for joining us here on Alaska Weather Facts. Until next time.
Welcome back, and quite an appropriate segment given the fact that we had that earthquake yesterday afternoon and subsequent tsunamis, so timely information there. Let's take a look at Southeast Alaska's marine forecast for tomorrow. Generally speaking, the inside waters, north to northwest winds 10 to 15 knots. Outside waters, west winds 20 knots to northwest winds as we get further north towards the Yakutat area. Northwest winds 20 knots up in that area. Taking a look at that area for Friday. Let's see, here we go. Okay, the winds are going to kind of turn around. That front's coming into the picture. You're going to see your winds coming out of the southeast, increasing to about 20 knots in the southern outside waters, as well as further up to the coast, as well as up toward Yakutat, 20 knots there. 10 to 15 knot winds in the inside waters right on up to Lynn Canal and Glacier Bay out of the southeast and south. Taking a look at the south central region for Thursday, generally pretty light winds, light and variable over the Sound, North Gulf Coast, Kodiak Island area, and south of Seward. East winds about 20 to 25 knots to northeast down Chillicothe Strait. Cook Inlet variable to northeast winds 10 to 15 knots. By Friday, we're going to start to feel the effects of that front moving on up into the area, seeing the winds over the North Gulf Coast increasing out of the east to 30 knots, as well as towards the Barren Islands. Over Kodiak Island, south and southeast winds 25 knots to northeast, 30 knots down Chillicothe Strait. Northeast winds 20 knots down Cook Inlet, as well as towards the Augustine area. Still light and variable winds to northeast winds 10 knots up into the northern Cook Inlet. And in Prince William Sound, around 15 knots out of the east, possibly 20 knots in the southern portion of the Sound. By Thursday, over the Alaska Peninsula, expect your winds to be out of the south-southeast, 20 to 25 knots on the south side of the peninsula. East winds 20 to 25 knots on the north side towards Bristol Bay as well. By Friday, expect conditions to be post-frontal, south winds 15 to 20 knots on the south side of the peninsula, as well as east winds 20 knots in Bristol Bay, with east winds 15 knots on the north side of the western Alaska Peninsula. For the Aleutian Islands on Thursday, southwest winds about 20 to 25 knots on the south side of the Aleutian Islands, basically from Adak east, 15 to 20 knots on the north side of the Aleutian Islands. Moving out towards the western and central Aleutians, northwest winds 25 to 30 knots there. By Friday, expect the winds to be gale force northerly winds over the western and central Aleutian Islands, north to northwest winds 30 knots across the Adak and Atka areas, and northwest winds 25 knots over the Nikolsky area to 15 to 20 knots over the eastern Aleutian Islands at the Unalaska area. Taking a look now at the Bering Sea area, 25 knot winds out of the east for the Pribilof Islands, northeast to east winds 20 knots in that Nunivak Island area. Gale force winds over the St. Matthew Island region at 35 knots, northeast winds 25 knots in the St. Lawrence Island region. By Friday, expect your winds to be out of the north and northeast, 30 knots from the St. Lawrence Island area right down across the Nunivak Island region, north winds 30 knots over the St. Matthew Island region right on down to the Pribilof Islands. For our Arctic coastal waters on Thursday, 15 to 20 knot easterly winds over the eastern Arctic coast, dropping off to about 10 knots over Barrow to the northwest Arctic coast, with 15 knot winds increasing to 20 knots out of the northeast as we get outside of Kotzebue Sound. By Friday, north winds 20 to 25 knots, basically from Cape Lisburne down to outside of Kotzebue Sound. Northeast to north winds 10 to 15 knots from Barrow to the west, with east winds 15 to 25 knots over the eastern Arctic coastal waters. Taking a look now at a quick recap for tonight's forecast. Most of the action is centered around our low pressure system out over the Aleutians and Bering Sea. Windy conditions, rainy conditions over the eastern Aleutians to the Alaska Peninsula. A mix of rain and snow over the Kodiak Island area as well as on up into the Pribilof Island region. Clear, cool conditions over much of the mainland. Some rainy conditions in the southern panhandle with snow mixing in as we get further to the north. And up along the Arctic coast, some flurries with fog there. Taking a look at the forecast again for Thursday, expect most of the action again to remain centered around our Bering Sea Aleutian low pressure system. Rainy conditions and somewhat windy conditions across the Alaska Peninsula as well as into the Kodiak Island area. A mix of rain and snow as we get over toward the Pribilof Islands and the central to western Aleutian Islands. Out over the western Aleutian Islands in that northwesterly and northerly flow, rain and snow showers mixed and rather gusty winds. And then for a real quick look at Friday, basically the windy conditions are going to persist across much of the Aleutian Islands in that northerly flow with the mixture of rain and snow showers there. Rain and windier conditions going across Kodiak Island. I had a time for the show this evening. Thank you for watching and have a good evening.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.